panel, we turn to Sandra McKellar. Sandra, Executive Director of Newfoundland's Sexual Assault and Crisis Prevention Center, and many more things. Visit feminist.ca for her bio. Sandra, welcome to the screen. Oh, Sandra, could you unmute yourself? Thank you so much. And thank you so much, Ophelia, for your presentation. Welcome, Sandra.
Thank you. I would like to thank Equal Voice and all the people who are taking the time today to listen into this, because it is so vital. As the director of the only organization in Newfoundland and Labrador that deals specifically with survivors and victims of sexual violence, I use them interchangeably because I know people have different perceptions of them. It is really what we have seen is that some of the very measures that were put in place to mitigate the spread of the virus, such as lockdown, social distancing, physical distancing, and other restrictions, actually increase the risk to such a vulnerable population. And it is really difficult because the increased isolation and difficulty accessing supports which have changed has, in a sense, sometimes encouraged perpetrators because they can act or and with impunity. Many people, particularly when it first started, were not sure if services were open, or if they were open, how could they access them? So there was initially a decrease in terms of people reaching out to our services, which include a 24-hour telephone, text, chat, support line, as well as accompaniment to the SANE nurse, which is the sexual examiner, sexual programming nurse examiner, as well as to the police. But what has happened since then, as we look at our stats, there has been a 30% increase in callers to our line, and many of them are repeat callers. And things that these vulnerable individuals say, I wasn't sure if you were around, I didn't know if I could do it, or if we would be jeopardizing anyone. So many of the factors that truly were put in place has generated increased difficulties. In terms of other changes we have seen, it's not that there are new inequities, it's just that the inequities that were present are glaringly obvious now during the pandemic. We're looking at quality childcare at a reasonable cost. We're looking at transportation. We're looking at food insecurity. And all these are affected by the fact that many of the individuals who take care of families are women, and women tend to work in service industries, such as, again, childcare, tourism, or seasonal things. And those are the ones that have been significantly affected. And when that's affected, then taking care of family becomes that much more expensive, that much more distressing when they can't do that kind of stuff. In terms of what we have done here at the center, we have partnered with a number of organizations for things like grocery cards or gift cards or care packages, but they are just stopgap measures, which really says to us, we need to look at those things. The other issue is significant impact in terms of mental health. Again, that is an area where we really need to move forward. We need to ensure that it's accessible, that it is stable, receives stable funding, and that people can access it as long as they need it, versus you can go twice and then that's it. Because what we essentially do sometimes is create our own wait list. So there are so many things that came up during the pandemic that were glaringly obvious to the vulnerable population, and maybe become more obvious to a majority of people now. The other thing that has happened is that when people feel distressed when there are more challenges. What I have heard from my friends of color is that some people feel freer, I guess, in a sense, to express their displeasure at someone because of the way they looked or their religion or anything that they're seen as different. And all those things then impact, I think, on the entire community, that we really do need to take those things into consideration, that when we put things in place, we need to look at it through intersectional lens, because it does have an impact. And it's the people who are impacted the most that really, if we can get support and buy-in from them, we can be surprised at what can be done to help facilitate, promote, help us get through this current pandemic.
And Sandra, I want to thank you and note that behind you, you have chosen to display an artistic production by one of the persons affected by this violence. And so you chose to honor her work behind you. Thank you so very much. Listen, we've slipped by 5 minutes because we, at the opening, had technical problems beginning. So Her Honor, just before you begin your sharing circle, I'd like to thank Sandra very much, along with our stunning speakers, and call upon Taylor Marie Berry, 21-year-old Memorial University undergraduate, to give us in a few seconds her highlights. What impacted you, Taylor, from the first panel?
So a couple things, but mostly the issues that Lyndon was having, especially as a young woman. I think that, and as a political science student, I think that infertility is a political issue and it should be treated as such. And I also learned a lot about the issues that sex workers have in Canada from Ophelia, which I unfortunately don't know a lot about that, but it definitely has piqued my interest to learn more about the advocacy, for sure.
Well, Taylor, thank you for stepping forward and being a youth voice, having peeked in at this extraordinary panel. And now it is my great pleasure to welcome Her Honor, Judy May Foote, the first female lieutenant governor in the history of the province of Newfoundland and Labrador, an extraordinary public civil servant, a servant who served in provincial and federal legislatures, a mentor for countless people, including cancer patients, volunteer with the Girl Guides of Canada. Her Honor, your CV is so uplifting and inspiring. It was you, by the way, that suggested the terminology sharing circle. So Ruth Chen, our IT champion, now a pre-medical student in Alberta, will bring up all of our panelists onto screen to have you conduct a sharing circle of the top recommendations from each of the panelists. Over to you, Her Honor, with our great privilege and excitement at introducing you.
Well, thank you, Betsy. And it's a real pleasure for me to join you for this sharing circle. And I chose sharing circle because we're so used to the terminology roundtable. For me, it just kind of relates to the old boys club. And I think what we really need to be focused on is sharing ideas, which we're doing today. And when I talk about circles, we all know that in the Indigenous language, circles mean healing. And I'd just like to reference where we are today with the discovery of the 215 bodies in BC. Sad indeed, and it's been difficult for all of us, but especially for the Indigenous community. But I want to have each of you who've given so much of your experience and knowledge and shared it with us in the sharing circle. I want each of you to speak to, in 45 seconds, which is not a long time, your top priority, what you really want us to take away from your presentation. So we could start with Nicola.
Thank you, Her Honor. So for me, I'd really like to encourage international collaboration and cooperation between New Zealand and Canada, Newfoundland and Labrador, given our Indigenous links. I'd also like to encourage and prioritise analysis of solutions for Indigenous women and girls, given the compounded impact of COVID, and really encourage the collection of data. There's not enough about Indigenous women and girls, and so often we have Indigenous data as one lump, and there's no gendered analysis at all. Thank you.
All right. Chunyan, you want to expand on or give us your priority coming out of the information you shared with us, please?
Thank you. like I wish to see that more supports from the government to help minority groups build a strong community, so that people, in Newfoundland can be exposed to more cultural activities, events, and experience, mostly run by women, and a strong, minority community normally brings positive experience to newcomers, attracts more people to come through word of mouth, helps with economics, and enhances and develops multiculturalism in Newfoundland. And I also wish to see more open conversation and events about multiculturalism and its value in our education system at all levels. When people are exposed more to the minority groups and their culture, they will recognize, understand, and respect more to the contribution and the value from the minority groups.
Thank you so much. It's amazing what you can fit into 45 seconds. Ledon, I can relate to your issue. My daughter had the same experience. So as I listened to you, I remembered my experiences with her. So if you could speak for 45 seconds to what you want us to take away from this.
I'd like to have equal access and equal opportunity for all Canadians, regardless of location and financial situation, for access to reproductive health care. I think our bank accounts and address shouldn't determine if we are able to have a child or not. I'd also like to address that I'm not directly asking for funding or anything right now. I would just like the government cooperation with the doctors who are here, willing and trained and able to work in an IVF clinic to help start a privatized clinic, just so we can actually have access within our own province, which would make it more accessible to almost everybody in the province.
Thank you so much. Katie, as I listened to you and about how COVID is impacting youth in particular, as you went through all of the issues, what really stuck with me was your positive outcome, your belief that we will get through this and we'll get through it together.
We will, that's right. Something that I believe is crucial coming out of this pandemic is proactive health, mental health education in K-12 schools. Through my 13 years in school, unfortunately, I've not had formal education on how to maintain my mental wellness. I strongly believe that if this had been taught, we would have had the tools to recognize our challenges and properly care for ourselves, we would have then been better equipped to deal with this pandemic. I believe we need to treat our brains like we treat our bodies. School teaches us how to keep our bodies healthy and resilient. We must also be taught the same with our brains. We need to normalize mental health and understand mental illness. We need to understand the differences within each other and create a world where we embrace supports. This begins with curriculum, more teacher training, and mental health first aid in schools.
Thank you. Ophelia, I was really taken with your presentation and recognizing that, of course, the impact of COVID on sex workers really impacts on every culture. So that if we're in this together, then we need to understand and realize how we all are being impacted. So if you'd like to, for 45 seconds, share with us your priorities.
So to echo something that Sandra had said, the reality of this is that sometimes the inequalities that we're dealing with here were there before and they've been worse and they're not necessarily new, which means that in some cases the solution is the same as it should have been before. We need to decriminalize sex work in Canada immediately. The Nordic model is not working. It is bringing direct harm into sex workers' lives, and it's making them considerably less safe. It's placing far too much power in the hands of people who don't deserve it. If we decriminalize now, workers will be safer. They'll have more flexibility, and if anything like this ever happens again, with any luck, they'll be able to access benefits more easily. And to community members, please unlearn your biases about sex workers. They're members of your community, and they deserve your respect.
Thank you. Sandra, thank you so much for your contribution today. And when we talk about sexual assault and crisis prevention, having access to a helpline is something that's really important. And I'm wondering if you could just elaborate a little bit on your presentation.
In terms of the helpline, it really provides vital support to individuals seeking information or resource because they're traumatized. And I think one of the things we've learned about trauma, it's not necessarily what you see on TV, that really it takes time and people need to process it, and that there are usually significant mental health issues. So in terms of moving forward, I think increasing the dedicated funds for mental health is so vital. Another issue would be investing in women. We talk about building capacity, but in order to build capacity, we need to facilitate and promote space. And we do that by ensuring that there's affordable daycare, that we address issues such as menopause, and women are not penalized when they get older and sometimes need to address any accompanying health issues, and that they get a chance for mentorship. Those are the things that are really important, including poverty and food insecurity. All those things, if we address them, I think leads then to an opening of opportunities for women as we talk about moving forward and gaining equity.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge, your experiences, and how we can move forward, particularly in Newfoundland and Labrador post-COVID. And I think it's going to be really important for us to make sure that we are pulling together. So thank you so much for sharing in 45 seconds so much of your knowledge and letting us know how you think we should move forward, because that's really important. And that's what sharing circles are all about. So thank you. And thank you, Betsy, for this opportunity.
Thank you. And what an exciting first panel. Thank you, Her Honor, for a stunning roundtable. And now, from the impact of COVID on us, we're going to flip it on its head and look at the power and impact of women and gender diverse individuals on COVID. So across the Atlantic to Liverpool University, it's my great pleasure to welcome to the screen Dr. Supriya Garikapati to tell us a little bit about her revelations on her academic study in the first 4 months of COVID. Over to you, Supriya. Welcome.
Thank you, Betsy. Hello, everyone. It's a great pleasure and a privilege to join you today. I'm a gender economist based at the University of Liverpool. And right since the start of the pandemic, the talk in the media about how well some women leaders were handling the COVID-19 crisis caught my interest. And we decided to scrutinize this association more systematically. So the goal of our study became to ask if there is a significant and systematic difference by gender of the national leader in the number of COVID cases and deaths in the initial phases of the pandemic. Given the very small number of female leaders in the world, the biggest challenge for us was to identify a methodology or technique that would make our findings fair and reliable. Here we decided a novel application of the nearest matching methodology, which intuitively speaking is a technique where we match women-led countries with their nearest male-led countries, where the matching is provided by a set of covariates. The basic model used income and demographic variables. Then we extended this model by the inclusion of other variables like health expenditure, openness to tourism, and also gender norms. What we found is that women-led countries had significantly better outcomes in terms of fewer COVID cases and deaths than comparable countries led by men. And this finding remained robust in several different specifications. So what explains this outcome? Well, in the study, we explored two main ideas. The first idea that we explore is policy response. Here we find that women leaders have been quicker and more decisive about locking down their economies when compared to the male leaders. In terms of numbers, women leaders locked down 24 deaths earlier than their male leaders. Now, it has been suggested that women leaders may have done this because women are more risk averse, but we propose that risk aversion is domain dependent. For it was clear that while in the domain of human lives, women leaders were highly risk averse, in the domain of economy, the same leaders were prepared to take considerable risk by closing their economies far sooner than the male leaders. Not only were female leaders more decisive, but the style and language they used in communicating their decisions were also distinct and different. We believe that these may have contributed to greater citizen compliance with the new emergency rules. So these two things really, being decisive and communicating their decisions in a way that speaks to citizens directly. In fact, such styles of communication were also adopted by some of the male leaders, like the Canadian Prime Minister. So what are the takeaways from this research? It certainly rekindles the debate around how leaders should behave. Much of the leadership literature remains heavily masculinized, where success is associated with male traits like assertiveness and authoritarianism. Women are often asked to lean in and conform to behavior expected of a leader. This research, however, suggests that it is misleading to assume the absolute success of certain traits of leadership, and more appropriate to view the success of leadership as being contextual, where certain traits may be better suited to certain situations. In this light, it is time to recognize the importance of diversity in leadership, not merely as a way of signaling gender or other types of equality, but to promote efficiency. Our result points to the idea that women's leadership is different, and that in the context of the pandemic, this difference proved to be better. Given the challenges countries and organizations face vary in nature, it seems clear that diversity in leadership will prove to be a major advantage in managing and minimizing risks in the future. Such diversity then is not simply a matter of equity, but it becomes a matter of efficiency. Thank you.
Thank you, Supriya. From across the ocean and on your screen, the Prime Minister of New Zealand. How exciting to have you foster relationships between our continents. And now to Dr. Deetra Walsh. I'll merely mention a PhD in sociology, master in rural development, and has worked abroad at UIT, the Arctic University of Norway, with which she's still affiliated, with a special lens on rural communities in our country. What a thrill. Deetra, welcome to the screen.
Wonderful. Thank you for the opportunity to be here today. Next slide, please. In the next 4 minutes or so, I take up the following thesis. For women to lead at the municipal level, we need to create the spaces that make their leadership possible and probable. Now, I know this is not a new thesis. We continue to advocate for change because municipal spaces, like many others, were designed and coded to benefit patriarchal colonial systems, and they still are. Municipal spaces struggle to see, accommodate, and invite women and gender diverse people in. Next slide, please. I work for Municipalities Newfoundland and Labrador, as you would have seen on the slide and in my bio. MNL, as we know it, is an organization representing 275 municipalities in our province. We are guided by a 12-person board of directors who are municipal leaders. And for the first time in MNL's history, and you can see them here, our board president and vice president are both women. A round of applause. Women comprise 30% of municipal councils in our province, and at most, a quarter of our mayors are women. MNL is doing work to make change. In 2017, we created a women's caucus to encourage the participation of more women in the sector and to support the ones who are there. We held our first Women's Leadership Forum in 2019, and we also run the Make Your Mark initiative. Next slide, please. Shortly after the pandemic began, we checked in with the Women's Caucus through a survey about leadership and the impacts of COVID-19. Respondents were both councillors and municipal staff. And one of the questions we asked was, what is your municipality doing to support women during this time? And there were 38 responses to this question. And these responses varied from everything to nothing to mentioning support for women working at home. Now, notably, several respondents acknowledged a lack of an explicit gendered lens, a sentiment echoed throughout the country as COVID unfolded. As one wrote, individual support is happening. However, there is not a gender lens on how women are being impacted and supported. Municipal spaces are not neutral spaces. They are not coded or designed to see women. Next slide, please. At MNL's Fall 2020 convention, former City of St. John's Mayor Shani Duff addressed our Women's Caucus, and we asked her to speak to the theme of why bother running. She had several key takeaways. She said, we bother because we want strong communities. We care. Collective voices influence change, and we need a voice around the table where decisions are made. The sentiment captured by the quote, "That's it, I'm running," at the back of Dr. McGregor's book, Women on the Ballot, is driven by all these reasons as to why we bother. And it may also be driven by what scholar Sarah Ahmed calls feminist snap, and I'll snap my fingers because she does that too. The breaking point, she says. Motivation to run is not the problem here. We snap to bother. But there are so many obstacles in the course to get there and to stay there. Municipal spaces are not neutral spaces. They are not coded or designed for us. Next slide, please. I'm encouraged to see that women, men, and those who are gender diverse are calling for change in our sector. Some of the key recommendations include running without financial penalty. People need to be able to run without financial penalty. Being forced to take unpaid leave and or resign from a position, for example, to run in a political campaign does not encourage diverse candidates. Remuneration. At the municipal level, councillors need to be remunerated, and these remunerations need to be treated carefully from an income tax perspective. Support and accommodations. Number 3, people need to be supported and accommodated while on council. Women, for example, need to have access to funding to support childcare while they are attending meetings, even virtual ones. They need childcare to be available for them to access. And finally, number 4, frameworks for good governance. We need clear, solid frameworks for good governance. In this province, this means enabling municipal legislation that puts focus on and supports good governance and codes of conduct, as opposed to seeing municipalities simply as service providers. I return to my thesis. In conclusion, for women to lead at the municipal level, we need to create the spaces that make this possible and probable. We need spaces that work to see and uplift all women, and spaces that invite more gender diverse people in to carry out the governance work that we need to and want to be doing. It is in the design, and we can change it. Next slide, please. Thank you.
Dietra, you've made your mark. Now, I hope a lot of hands are going up to start to run. And by the way, a shout out to the Women's Truckers Federation, who are active in the chat box this afternoon. And now it's my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Vianne Timmins, the Officer of the Order of Canada, among many things, the 13th President and Vice Chancellor of Memorial University, and SHIRC Advisory Committee on Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, and so much more. Visit Dr. Vianne Timmins' bio, feministforum.ca. Welcome to the screen, Vianne.
Thank you so much, Betsy, and thank you, Courtney. Wow, what inspiring women that I'm here with. And coming to Newfoundland during the COVID, I will tell you, this has been so exciting to see all these amazing women leaders, young and me, older. I want to begin by telling a little bit of a story. I grew up in Labrador. I come from a family of miners. My grandfather went to the coal mines at 12 years old in Cape Breton. I come from what would be considered not a privileged background. I want to talk about my grandmother, who was in school and was taken out of school in grade 4 to become a housekeeper. This was not that long ago, just my grandmother. That was her story. She got married at 16 to escape servitude here in Canada. These are stories of many of women, and it's important that we acknowledge the shoulders we stand on. And I want to begin by honoring the women who came before us. Memorial University. I'm the first woman president here, and it's been an interesting thing. So the impact of pandemic on women, I'll go to the next slide to show two organizations that I've been involved in the last year. One is When Women Succeed, We All Prosper, the Prosperity Project, and also the Canadian Chamber of Commerce. And what's so exciting for me is that the women's voices are on the national stage. We have champions working so hard, but what makes me sad is that we have to have these champions in 2021, that we still are out there promoting the idea of equity, which my grandmother would be very sad about that. Impact of Memorial University, I'll go to the next slide. You can see I came here April 1st, and this is what I came to lead. A university with no people, no students, no faculty, no staff, to try to walk those halls. And as a leader, as a woman, it was important for me to try to have a presence here in a time of real difficulty. And for many women, to have that presence is a challenge. So I'll just share with you the next slide, which shows what I tried to do. I went around in June last year when things were opening up, and I did Tales from the Road Month. The first time I'd ever done videos and posted on Twitter. You can see I'd made a lot of bloopers. It was a real challenge, but the generosity of the Newfoundland people was so important to me, and I got to meet amazing women through this province. But what struck me is how it was so tough for me to get outside my comfort zone, and how vulnerable I felt so often when I was doing this. And for women, we are vulnerable. We are out there as, whether we're leaders or students. My daughter said to me, you know, Mom, men don't have to worry when they walk through a parking lot at night, and many, many other things. And she is a young woman who recognizes a challenge with women. During COVID, it has had a significant impact, we've heard, on women, but it also has had a significant impact on women faculty members who have talked to me about how their research has been compromised, how it's been a real challenge to them trying to teach from home and look after family and work, and how for so many women that are afraid that we've gone back a decade, and how we don't have the solutions, but we need to listen carefully and try to figure out supports. And I'll tell you why this is important. The next slide. This is important because of Saoirse. Saoirse is my granddaughter, who I have not seen in over a year. Saoirse is Gaelic for freedom. And as my grandmother struggled, I do not want Saoirse to struggle. Saoirse, as you can see, she's biracial, she's adopted, and she has 2 dads. Saoirse is a child of the future, and we must all keep working so hard, all of us together, all of the women here and so many more, to ensure that Saoirse and all the girls like Saoirse have a better future than we have left in our legacy for women. For my daughter, I want my granddaughter to not face what my 3 daughters have faced in our society. So for all of you women out there, for all of you allies and advocates out there, remember what we do is for Saoirse. Thank you.
Oh, Vian, thank you for weaving, yes, as we wipe our tears, thank you for weaving the thread between your grandmother and Saoirse, and standing on the shoulders of yourself as first female president of the university, Her Honor, first lieutenant governor female, so many women first who are here to speak. Thank you for the power of your connection also, but to the corporate world and the private sector role. And as a founding visionary, you were with the Prosperity Project. And Pamela Jeffrey, also the founder, was on an earlier Feminist Forum. So we thank you for your work at connecting the private sector. And now it's my pleasure to move to Kathy Hawkins, Manager of Inclusion, Newfoundland and Labrador, professional certification, website accessibility from University of South Australia, President of the Disabled Women's Network of Canada, and member of the International Association of Accessibility, And I want to thank you for bringing our wonderful interpreters, Sandra, and our English interpreter to the screen to make our Feminist Forum 4 accessible. Kathy, welcome to the screen. Kathy Hawkins.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks so much to the organizers for inviting me to be a part of the panel. I'm just honored to be included with such an esteemed group of leaders. I would like to highlight that this event is actually taking place during National Accessibility Awareness Week and National Indigenous Accessibility Awareness Week. Thanks to the organizers for the inclusion and the accessibility features available. Please don't hesitate to reach out to me if you require this presentation in French. Next slide, please. Founded in 1985, the Disabled Women's Network of Canada is a national feminist human rights organization with a cross-disability intersectional lens. Our mission is to end the poverty, isolation, discrimination, and violence experienced by women with disabilities and women who are deaf and hard of hearing. Dawn Canada is an organization that works towards advancement and inclusion of all women and girls with disabilities by creating systemic change. This includes building strategic partnerships, producing research, reports, education programs, and teaching tools, as well as calling for policy level change. As noted in this slide, our work focuses on 4 fundamental pillars: research, education, policy, and advocacy. True to our roots, Dawn Canada lifts the voices of women with disabilities by ensuring that we are represented in spaces where decision-making takes place. Next slide, please. The Dawn Canada team, under the leadership of our National Executive Director, Bonnie Brayton, have been leaders through the COVID pandemic by amplifying the voices, issues, and barriers of women with disabilities have experienced. The images on this slide are just a few examples of articles, projects, and research that we have completed over this past year. In 2021, we are culminating 35 years of service, and we are mapping our future in our 10-year Vision for Change plan. We have been working with other civil society organizations through participation in federal government advisory committees and have collaborated with community partners to host as well as participate in numerous meetings, activities, and events around COVID. Our most recent work included facilitating a Canada-wide group of subject matter experts on gender-based violence to provide insights and recommendations on the National Action Plan to end gender-based violence for Minister Monsaf and women and gender equality. We have been busy, and I would strongly encourage you to visit our website to take a further look at what we've accomplished. Next slide, please. Dawn Canada has been leaders through the COVID pandemic. We have conducted research and presented a parliamentary brief to the Standing Committee on the Status of Women on the impacts of COVID-19 on women with disabilities and deaf women in Canada. We have also partnered with the University of Guelph Live, Work, Well Research Center to complete a disability inclusion analysis on lessons learned and best practices of the Government of Canada responses to the COVID pandemic. Throughout this research, an intersectional disability gender analysis lens was applied to ensure interviews and focus groups included a high proportion of diverse women with disabilities. This research had 2 key findings. People with disabilities were invisible, despite the fact of complexity in living conditions placed them at a greater risk. And people with disabilities had difficulty meeting day-to-day needs. Next slide, please. Women with disabilities had unique challenges in a number of areas throughout COVID. If we were to look at caregiving, of course, it's quite clear that when we talk about women with COVID, caregiving is a key issue as it has impact on women who are both caregivers and care receivers. Employment, income were also issues that were significantly impacted for women with disabilities during COVID. And of course, of utmost importance is the increased rates in gender-based violence for women with disabilities, which is currently twice the level of non-disabled women. This has increased due to isolation during COVID. Last slide, please.
Thank you.
As we continue to navigate through this pandemic and beyond, Dawn Canada will continue to be strong leaders, ensuring that women with disabilities are at every decision-making table with our voices amplified and strong. As I mentioned earlier, This is National Accessibility Awareness Week and National Indigenous Accessibility Week. And if I were to leave you with a strong message today, I would like to highlight themes being promoted during this week. Leaving nobody behind, and if it's not accessible, it is just not acceptable. Thank you.
Je vous remercie infiniment. Kathy, thank you so very much. And now, Sobia, Dr. Sobia Sheikh, among other things, faculty member at Memorial, co-chair the Anti-Racism Coalition, ARC, in Newfoundland and Labrador, the Addressing Islamophobia Project, the Quilted Collective of Racialized Writers, and the BIPOC Creators Collective. My great pleasure. Over to you, Dr. Sobia Sheikh.
Hi, thank you, Dr. McGregor, Courtney, and other panelists for such interesting presentations about COVID and women and gender diverse people who face multiple interlocking forms of oppression. Next slide. My presentation today is about the crisis of trust that many of us who identify as women and gender diverse people and those who identify as Indigenous, Black, migrants, and or racialized women, and the work that we must do in order to ensure feminist racial justice lens, both here in Newfoundland and Labrador and across the world. I want to start off by saying that the intended audience of my presentation is explicitly Indigenous, Black, migrant, and other racialized women and gender diverse people. Next slide. COVID laid bare the inability of our public institutions and the organizations who are meant to support or protect or serve us. Next. Let me be clear, our lack of trust did not start nor will it end with the pandemic. The pandemic highlighted and amplified the failures of these systems. In Newfoundland and Labrador, for example, particularly in St. John's during Snowmageddon, we got a preview of this inequality. And many women and people of all genders came together to provide mutual aid to one another. For those of us who are racialized, we came to understand even the inadequacies of these initiatives, as they often relied on already existing networks. And for people who are oppressed because of ableism, classism, transphobia, stigmatization based on the work that they do, these networks may not yet exist. Next. The pandemic brought also a global awareness of the brutality and violence being experienced by Indigenous and Black and Asian and Muslim and migrant communities. Next. And brought us to an understanding that without intentional solidarity, that feminist racial justice is just not possible. Next. Our collective vision must counter the crisis of trust that we have experienced and must work towards an intentional and collective solidarity in order to build brick by brick, moment by moment, communities in which trust is deserved. Next. I center in this vision, in this visioning, Black, Indigenous, migrant, and racialized women and gender diverse people, both locally and globally. Next. Sorry about too many slides. For those of us working in intentional anti-racist communities, there are three main parts of this vision. First, we need to develop an intention of working within and across our communities if we are going to counter racialized harm. This must be an intentional focus on building relationships and trust. Second, we need to develop and hold space for dismantling systems that do not serve us. We do this by believing our own and each other's experience of harm. It is understandable and desirable to want to undo systems which repeatedly harm us. And finally, we must invest in people who face daily racisms in order to build community. We need to reject any and all empty visions and ideals which do not actively work to build relationships nor make any real change. Next. In the last few slides, I've listed a few practices that we in the anti-racist community in this province have found helpful. So first, the main intention is to create space to talk to one another, both within our own racialized communities and across other intersectional communities. We need to de-escalate violence. We need to heal and support. We need to attend to everyday racist hurts. And don't let anyone minimize or gaslight this important work, nor experiences of harm. And perhaps most difficultly, we have to address the harms that we do to others, to reflect, listen, reflect, fix, reflect, do better, reflect, and so on. Next.
Uh-oh.
We have to believe in our own skills and capacity to respond to the problems we face. Women and gender diverse people who face racism, income insecurity, transphobia, stigmatization are excellent problem solvers. Give each other resources, space, education, validation, whatever we need to mobilize our own strengths. As Mariam Kaba says, we do this until we free us. Last, normalize asking people in groups to be better, to be more accountable to one another. Our collective survival depends on it.
Dr. Sheikh, thank you so much. I can't wait for your policy. We're about to enter into the finale closing circle with our parliamentary secretary. But first, our final panelist, Jude Benoit. Jude, a two-spirit person, advocate for the two-spirit trans community, and co-founder of grassroots groups like the Indigenous Activist Collective and the neighboring Pod. Over to you, Jude, as the final speaker, and then to our parliamentary secretary to conclude the afternoon with our sharing circle. A few minutes to you, Jude.
Hi, thank you for inviting me to be here. I had a lot of different things that I wanted to say, and this is a very short amount of time, but I would like to start with, I guess I wasn't going to talk about my grandmother, but then someone else brought up their grandmother, so I'm just going to go for it. My grandmother also went through a similar struggle where she married at a young age to escape servitude to the Catholic Church. The difference, I'm not sure if your grandmother was Indigenous, the person that spoke before me, but my grandmother was Mi'kmaq First Nations to this island. And when she married my grandfather, who was a white man, she lost all rights to herself. The very few rights that she had as an Indigenous girl disappeared, and she was his property essentially. She wasn't allowed to own property. She wasn't allowed to go to school. She wasn't allowed to vote. All of these things that we talk about when we talk, and the reason I'm bringing this up is because a lot of the voices that spoke on this panel today were white. And when we're talking about feminism, we absolutely need to bring up women's voices and equality that a lot of us have. When we're talking about feminist struggle, a lot of us are on a very different timeline. Indigenous women, Indigenous girls, Indigenous two-spirit people are suffering. And there are quite a few things just on a base level that we can do in Newfoundland and Labrador to try to help that suffering and to try to heal, but we can't heal while there's continued violence. With that being said, during COVID, my body fell apart. If I could just like talk to people as people, I, like most of us, was taking care of elderly family members. I was working customer service and minimum wage. And minimum wage is not a living wage, and all of this different stress that happened to me because I live well below the poverty line contributed to my overall physical and mental health just completely tanking. When I was asked to do this panel, I had to consider if I even had the spoons, the energy to sit and talk for 5 minutes. And I'm so glad that I came, but I am exhausted. And I think that it's important to point that out, that, you know, I created grassroots movements because the government failed us. They failed us from before this pandemic even moved in by having a lack of resources, such as accessible and safe food banks. There should be no limit on how much a family needs to eat. I don't know if you've ever, I personally have had to go to a food bank. They don't give you enough food to last 2 weeks, never mind if you're an isolated elderly person and you can't afford to transportation. It just was a mess. One of the things that we created with the neighboring pod was food hampers and food gift cards. And we had racialized, disabled, Indigenous women and trans people who were also working full-time in minimum wage jobs, driving around the city at night to drop off food hampers. And often I find that that labor of taking care of communities falls on the people that do not have the energy to take care of those people. It's a constant cycle of harm of, okay, I'm helping someone else, but now my body is breaking down and now I need help. And that is exhausting. And it, you know, it's, I think that's really, if I had to connect globally what women and trans, non-cis men face together, is that we are always taking care of ourselves and we're also always striving to take care of everyone else. But there's a reason why grassroots movements and non-for-profits and why there's such a high burnout rate to that, because we are often doing things that we do not have the energy and the resources to do. And as beautiful and inspiring as these stories are of communities coming together and taking care of each other, the stories might be beautiful, but behind that, there's a very real systemic issue. There's several very real systemic issues behind why we need to take care of ourselves. We shouldn't be solely reliant on grassroots movements and nonprofits and charities to take care of people. That should be what our government is for. Yeah, I don't know how long I've gone on time, sorry.
Well, Jude, we could only express to you our profound thanks. You are the connective tissue at the most grassroots level, doing the most fundamental lifting up of lives. So thank you for coming with us today. And I hope we all can see each other's connectivity, and certainly our two collaborators in the sharing circle will give us ideas next on how we can stay connected and help you more than we are doing now. So I'm going to give Gloria Jones, our 22-year-old undergraduate at Memorial University, a few seconds here, Gloria, with the impossible task of a couple of ideas that really struck deeply in your heart, and then on to the Parliamentary Secretary to convene our sharing circle.
Well, what really struck me was just then Jude's point about burnout. And I think the thing is that a lot of your guys' points was to listen to each other's stories and everyone's experiences. And as a person of color, I've voiced that philosophy to the white peers around me and just all tried to practice what I preach as well. So I think also the great thing that's happening here today is all of us as a collective are listening to each other's stories, especially you folks who've mentioned your grandparents and everything, because listening to those collective stories and experiences is what's going to push us forward.
Thank you, Gloria. And now to guide sharing circle number 2, MP Goody Hutchings, MP for Long Range Mountains in Newfoundland and Labrador, and Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Canada's Women and Gender Equality and Rural and Economic Development. And she will invite, as did her honor, each of our panelists on the second panel to offer in 45 seconds their top policy priority. And at the end of that sharing circle, we go to the finale where Her Honor and the Parliamentary Secretary will, with Courtney, and Courtney Clark is what a celebrated leader of this forum to have found such a wonderful wealth of people. We've all been talking for now about a month together preparing for these 90 minutes. So thank you to you, Courtney. Thank you to the interpreters and to our IT champion, Ruth Chen. Over to Parliamentary Secretary Goody Hutchings and Sharing Circle 2.
Thank you so much, Betsy. And first of all, thanks to Equal Voice and the Feminist Forum for the invitation to be here today. I have to give a big shout out to Her Honor, Judy Foote, dear colleague and Fred, good to see you, and thank you for breaking so many glass ceilings, Your Honor. And I too have to recognize this profound sadness that we've all been experiencing this week. I can tell you we had caucus today, and there were many tears shed of what's going on in Kamloops. And our hearts go out to all the Indigenous communities across Canada, especially here at home in Newfoundland and Labrador. And you know, we do know COVID-19 hit hard with everyone, but no one more than women, gender diverse peoples, and especially those with children working from home. It's been just a terrible time. But I have to tell you that there was no playbook written on COVID-19. When we all left, everybody thought it was a few weeks and we'd be back, and here we are months later. But thankfully, we do have leaders in our community. We have leaders in Newfoundland and Labrador, and we have leaders across the pond, as we've seen today, Supriya. So in the next 45 seconds each, we're going to let you, as our honor did, you know, just prioritize your ideas for us. Supriya, your theme of female leaders is so important. I loved it when you said women lean in, because you know we can't lean in anymore. We have got to lead and let the men follow us. So over to you, Supriya, for your 45 seconds.
Thank you, Goody. Well, you know, the one unifying theme that came out of this panel is that we need change. And as a researcher, I have to say that scholarship is absolutely key. There is a real need for evidence-based engagement for effective policy change. What I believe we need is a platform that brings together innovative research, big data, and policymakers that can address some of the fundamental questions in the area of leadership. For instance, do all leaders have similar objective functions? Are differences among leaders a good thing? Is there a unifying way of governing for prosperity and equality? What value does diversity in leadership bring to institutions and nations? For the very first time, we have the data on diverse leadership at many levels of governance. And for the very first time, we have the research techniques that make it possible to answer fundamental questions. We, however, need a platform that brings talent and resources together.
Oh, so well said. So well said. Deidre, and nice to see you again, my friend. And you know what? Thank you for breaking the municipal glass ceiling. That needs to change. We all know that women's leadership is different. So Deidre, in your 45 seconds.
I'll do my best. Thank you, Goody. It's good to see you as well. I want to focus my recommendations on two items, just to follow up from the presentation on the non-neutral spaces of policy and legislation. So remuneration and the issue of income tax deductions. In 2019, a long-standing federal tax exemption for elected municipal office holders expired, reducing their after-tax compensation. And in particular, smaller municipalities were impacted by this, and many of those would struggle to boost salaries, even when current compensation rates can be a barrier to more inclusive participation. And I just want to note that our membership just voted on a resolution submitted by the town of Cupids regarding this legislative change, requesting its repeal. We have to address remuneration and income tax. Secondly, we do need to address the issue of running without financial penalty, and I will point to a piece that, a resolution that was also supported by our members in the recent AGM, that basically where unpaid leaves of absence and resignations, they place undue financial burdens on candidates and deter underrepresented candidates from running in elections. And just to quote, therefore be it resolved that municipalities, Newfoundland and Labrador, work with the federal and provincial government and other organizational partners to identify the nature and the impact of these stipulations on candidates, potential candidates, and find solutions to these regulatory impediments. We need to carry on with this important work. Thank you.
Well said, Deidre. You can take a breath now. It was interesting at caucus this morning. We had a comment made by one of our colleagues who said, thankfully, you don't have to pay to become a member to join to support. He said, if I had to do that, there's no way I would have done it. So we need more of the federal regulations into municipal and provincial regulations. Vianne, over to you, Dr. Timmons. Nice to see you, my friend. I must say, your comments about your grandmother and the women that came before us, Saoirse has an incredible role model, and I know she's going to break some glass ceilings too.
If I ever see her, right? If I ever see her with the pandemic. I just want to say first to Jude, my great-great-grandmother was Marie-Therese Benoit, grew up in Conn River. So probably a connection there, Jude. It was so great to see you. The first thing I would say public policy would be childcare, and we're moving on that, so I'm thrilled. The second is support for Indigenous communities. It's the greatest public policy failure in the history of this country, and we need to do something about it. And the third thing I'll say is that in the 1990s, I thought we broke the glass ceiling. I was the first woman dean of education at UPEI. There was a woman minister of education and a woman premier and a woman president of the university. I thought we're there, and we kind of went quiet, and look where we are more than 20 years later. We need our voice. Keep your voices out there. Stay strong. Keep the message going. I know it's fatiguing, but for Saoirse, we need you, and our grandkids need you. So please stay strong.
Thanks, Fianne. So well said. Sabaya, you hit the nail on the head so much. Racism just cannot be tolerated. And oh, Kathy, sorry, I jumped one ahead. Whoops, Kathy, sorry. Whoops, we'll get to you, Sabaya. Kathy, 35 years. Wow, what an accomplishment. And you know what? Accessibility, I love your line, leave no one behind. We shouldn't even be having those conversations in 2021. But thanks to the great work that you're doing, we are breaking that glass ceiling too. So over to you, Kathy.
Thanks so much, Goody. I have 3 asks, and yes, accessibility is of the utmost. I ask that moving policy forward that we have an intersectional disability gender analysis lens that's applied to ensure that it reaches and reflects our diverse population. My second ask is that policies develop and change. We need to ensure that it is an inclusive design is implemented so that no one is left behind. And then of course, my third ask is that it is crucial, absolutely crucial, that women with disabilities are at all decision-making tables, and that we look forward to collaborating on all those decisions. Thanks, Goody.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Cassie. Now over to you, Sabaya. Sabaya, yes, now I'll say it again. You know, it is 2021. And again, racism shouldn't be tolerated in aid. It drives me that here we are still having those conversations. And I loved your word about trust, because if we don't have trust, you know, that's the key element of all of this. And look at the trust that we're showing today with all of these powerful people here. We need to keep conversations like this going too. Sabaya, over to you, my friend.
Thanks. It's Sobia. So I have 5 things that I was able to pare down from my list of 35. Put into practice all 94 calls to action of the Truth and Reconciliation process, and follow fully the UNDRIP. Give land back to the people who are Indigenous to this land. Second, dismantle institutions which are built on anti-Black, anti-Indigenous, anti-migrant racisms and cannot be trusted to protect and serve Black, Indigenous, and racialized communities. Third, stop using outdated consultation models. Go to the communities and groups you are trying to support. Expect lack of trust. Keep at it. Fourth, give racialized, migrant, and Indigenous communities a space and time to figure out what they need to end violence. Give them resources, money, training, time, mentorship, whatever. Believe them, believe what they need, what they say they need to come up with good solutions. And last, hire racialized, migrant, Indigenous people with actual analysis you don't want to hear. Listen to them. Hire those with anti-racist, anti-colonial analysis. And that's it.
Well said. One thing I have to tell you, in my role as parliamentary secretary, I work hand in hand with Minister Monseft as we build the National Action Plan. And we have done, we've connected with thousands of people from coast to coast to coast on each aspect, because I agree with you so much, my friend. It's programs like this, when we're making change to end gender-based violence and racism, it has to be built from the ground up. So I'm so delighted that we have been doing that. And like I said, we've had roundtables and, as Her Honor would say, healing circles from all across the country. And that's how you build a good plan from the ground up. Now, Jude, my friend, your grandmother sounds amazing as well. And mine was too. And thank you for just reminding us we all come from a very special place. I'm so sad that some of the programs that we put in place didn't help, but I'm delighted that you and yours reached out and took advantage of a terrible situation and reached out to help others in need. So give us your 45 seconds.
Yeah, so as my photo was put up earlier, that is the statue of Court Riel. He was a slaver that stole my people and Beothuk people and killed them, sold them into slavery. There's no reason for his statue to still be up outside of the Confederation building. There's no reason for a lot of these statues and names. The doctrine of discovery, I was just talking to some of the people that are with me in the Indigenous Activist Collective, and we believe that there needs to be a huge renaming and ripping down of these colonial figures. That is like bare minimum, and I'm asking for it today because I actually believe that by me asking today that we could make it happen. I know that there's history connected to it, but it's not a history that should be celebrated. It's a history that we should be ashamed of. So we would like the start of that ball to be rolling. We've been asking for years. And then on top of that, also defunding and dismantling the police and raising the minimum wage and or implementing a universal basic income, because those of us that are most marginalized are quite literally dying in poverty. I think that's it. Oh, when we're removing the statue, can we give that power back to the people instead of using it to, I don't know where I'm going with this, but it needs to be given the power back to the people. They worked towards getting it taken down, so they should be in charge of how it's taken down, and not just elected members that are Indigenous or members of your choosing, but members of our choosing who are important and spiritual and sacred to us. Thank you. Wellon.
Over to you, Betsy. Thank you for that. You're just amazing.
Wow. This was a stunning 90 minutes plus. Thank you for your profound and touching and urgent messages and experience. And I want to thank our interpreters and also the Equal Voice for generating the vision to mount Feminist Forum 4 and the Feminist Forum team, including Rosemary Ganley and Ruth Chen, our IT manager. And now over to Courtney Clark to come to the finale with the parliamentary secretary and her honors, conclusions and actions. Where are we headed? What are some possible networks, connections, actions that we can take together to keep this wonderful community and previous Feminist Forum alumni connected together and speaking and moving the agenda? Over to you, Courtney.
Thank you so much, Betsy. And wow, what a powerful session this has been. And as I mentioned in the beginning, this is the beginning. This is not where we end today. When we come off this call, there is a lot of work to be done, and I guarantee that I will do everything in my power to make sure that those collaborations happen. So now on to the finale of the event. I'm going to start by asking the Lieutenant Governor, Her Honor the Honorable Judy May Foote, and then moving over to MP Goody Hutchings. What was it that struck you the most today, and how do you feel that you can effectively utilize your platform to help move these issues forward so that we come out of COVID more equitably and sustainably than we came in?
Well, thank you so much, Courtney, first and foremost, for your work in making sure that this Feminist Forum materialized. And thank you to Betsy. It's been a real honor for me to be among so many trailblazers. So good to see my good friend Goody Hutchings. I miss you. But what is really important, I think, coming out of this is that we need to understand the importance of women supporting women. And I tell you that because I don't think we do it enough. And just an example, when I was with a young lady who was running in an election. Well, she wasn't a young lady, but younger than I was at the time. And she was running against a man. And she was, and Goody would know who I'm talking about, very qualified, equally as qualified as the man. We knew that the population was 52% women. So we knocked on so many doors because I was supporting her in this campaign. And when we walked away, I thought for sure she would win it because every woman who came to the door said, "You have my support." Well, guess what? She lost miserably. So I keep saying women aren't supporting women. And we talk the talk, but we really need to get our heads together about how we do that. And here at Government House, while I'm not my role doesn't include developing policy, but what I can do is empower. I can bring people together, and that's where the sharing circle comes from. Because here we have what we call sharing circles, and Courtney would know because Equal Voice helped us with the one we did about empowering women. But it's an opportunity to bring people together, and I'm prepared to do that as the first female lieutenant governor, to have more sharing circles focusing on issues important to women and how we can pursue making them better or bringing them, finding a conclusion that's going to be beneficial to women. My experience as a member of a gender balanced cabinet when I was in Ottawa was, it showed that the proof is that when you have a gender balanced cabinet in particular, that the policy that you develop is much more inclusive. But I think we need to really emphasize the value and what women bring to the table. Their experiences are different those of men. So when we're having that discussion and you get both thought processes coming together, you end up with a better product in the way of policy. But this has been amazing to hear from so many of you. My 30 years in public service has shown me again how valuable women are and how we need to be engaged. It's the one thing I think that we're missing, because we listen, women listen to each other. And part of the solution in all of the issues that we're facing as a province, as a country, is that people aren't listening. And we really need to do that. And we do it well as women, which leads me to say that if we talk more, I mean, I believe that women talking to women can change the world. I've seen the impact of women coming together and making a difference. And we need to do that. So Courtney, thank you so much for the work that you do with Equal Voice. I remember going to the MNL, focus on women, the Forum Women's Caucus there, and having an opportunity to speak. And that was my message to them, because we don't have, while we're making great inroads in terms of the number of women leaders and women getting elected, we aren't there yet. And one of the points I made at that forum was women need to support women and not just pay it lip service. So today we've talked about many issues that we need to continue to talk about, but we really need to get our heads around why is it that we do not have more women in leadership roles? Why is it that we don't have more women in the provincial House of Assembly or in federal politics? And why is it that we don't have more women in leadership roles in the MNL? So all of these things, I guess we need to reflect on what we as women are doing to encourage and profile women. And as the first woman lieutenant governor, my installation included all women. In terms of the entertainment was by all women. I ended up bringing in a girl guide pack from my hometown, again, to look at and for them to see a woman becoming the first woman lieutenant governor, because it's a role model. It's important for them to know that they too can become whatever they set their minds to. It takes hard work, but because you're a girl doesn't mean that you can't become whatever you want to become. So I think for all of us, and from the Indigenous perspective, we had a water ceremony at my installation because I wanted to have an Indigenous perspective as part of the installation. It was important to do. And in concluding, here at Government House, lieutenant governors get to have aide-de-camps, and that's someone who supports them throughout the 5 years of the term. I put in place 25 women aide-de-camps because I wanted to send the message that working together, there's nothing we can't accomplish, but we must work together. Thank you so much, Betsy, for the invitation, and to you, Courtney, to Equal Voice, for including me in what has been a wonderful 2 hours.
Thank you so much, Her Honor. And what about yourself, Gibby?
And again, to echo what Her Honor said, Courtney and Betsy, and to all of Equal Voice, and to all of you for participating today, especially you, Your Honor. We know that Canada's recovery from this pandemic depends on ensuring that Canadian women and diverse individuals are working, safe, and their families cared for. If any of you looked at Budget 2021, there were 3 themes. One was, let's get this pandemic under control, get vaccines in the arms of people. So I hope you're all putting your arm out there and getting your vaccine when you can. Of course, it was getting people, jobs stabilized, but then there was the growth factor. And we know that we won't build a stronger, more inclusive recovery if we don't have women and diverse individuals at that table, making the decisions and working to get it done. And we know that they're difficult conversations, but they're an important part and play a very important part of the road to recovery and the road to progress. And we have to address the root causes of inequality. That's just a norm. We have to get to the point that these conversations are behind us and we are working ahead. One of the things that we've heard throughout all the pandemic is how important childcare is. So I'm delighted that we've come up with a plan now to get that into the hands of every Canadian from coast to coast to coast. The goal is to have $10 daycare in a year or two, with working, of course, with the provinces and territories. And the other thing that we do that we don't talk enough about as a government is that we put a gender-based lens on every single policy that comes out. Her Honor may remember when she was sitting at the cabinet table, we implemented that. There's a gender lens that goes on every piece of legislation, and it's mandatory that happens. So we are making steps, but we're only doing that by listening to people like yourselves. So thanks for all you do. Please stay safe, reach out anytime. And I can't wait till we can do this in person one of these days. As wonderful as this is to do, Zoom has taught us that we can get a group of people together from all across the world. And thanks to our friends from Australia and the UK from being here with us today. But it'll be great when we can finally do this in person. But in the meantime, please stay safe. And again, to Equal Voice, thanks for all the work you do. Your Honor, thanks to see you.
Parliamentary Secretary, don't leave quite yet. There's a snippet of a group photo, all 12 on screen. Over to you, Courtney, for your remarks as Ruth Chen brings panelists, interpreters, and youth all on the screen for a quick final photo. Your comments, Courtney.
Thank you both so much, and I'll be sure to be following up to make some of those promises a reality very soon. Just to wrap up to this event, I want to thank you all so much for attending today. A reminder that if you are struck by what you've heard and you'd like to contribute to the continuing work of the panelists, you can tip the panelists on our Eventbrite page used to originally register for this event. I look forward to sharing the formal report and the follow-up information with you all, and a special thank you to all of our panelists, Dr. Betsy McGregor for moderating the event, Lieutenant Governor and MP Hutchings for co-hosting the Sharing Circles, Ruth Chen on IT, the 2 ASL interpreters, and of course to all of you who tuned in today. Thank you again, and I invite all of you to put your name on the ballot.
And now, Ruth, could you take us back to a screen? And thank you, Parliamentary Secretary, Her Honor, interpreters, the youth, interveners on the chat box, and all panelists. Can we come up on screen, Ruth? Is that possible? Here we come. And thank you to all the participants, those Women's Trucking Federation, the people all across the nation. I believe there were close to 400 persons watching and contributing to the chat box. We will all appear in the final report and all those policy recommendations. Ruth, is it possible, or is it a bit of a trick to get everyone on screen now?
So everyone has to change their own views. If you would like to see on gallery view, you'll be able to see everybody.
Oh, so we're all there. Do we just smile into, oh, there we are. All right, well, you count down 3, 2, 1, and we'll give you a big smile.
All right, so 3, 2, 1, smile. Awesome. Thank you, everybody.
Merci infiniment, Anine. Farewell until the next forum. Thank you to all.
Thank you.
Thank you.